Hey there, Alex Kidman here with my video review of this, the Google Pixel 8 Pro. Yes, the embargo has lifted and I can now give you my opinion on Google's new flagship phone. And for those of you with very low patience thresholds, I'll say this. It's very good in the main. There are a couple of specific little things I think Google could have done better, but for the money, it's hard to argue with. I still think you should stick around to find out the bits that I don't like and the bits that I think are quite exceptional, but there's your quick summary for those with no patience. Also, of course, I should remind you to like and subscribe, help the channel grow, give me feedback and comments. I can take it all. Have at it. So Google's Pixel line of phones haven't historically been the best sellers here in Australia, with all the credible figures suggesting that we mostly tend to buy either Samsung or Apple badged handsets en masse. And look, that hasn't stopped Google having a red hot go at it. Pixel 8 Pro is, of course, the latest in that lineup. So let's talk about design. And look, there's not too many surprises here. Google, of course, actually showed off the Pixel 8 Pro a lot before launch, and that's because they haven't made that many changes. So the camera bar, for example, is still very much present. It's a like it or loathe it kind of prospect. I find throwing a case, and I do tend to throw cases onto every phone, to be a good way to deal with that if you find it problematic. The glass backing has a nice touch feel to it. It feels good, I suppose is the simplest way I can put it, but it's otherwise very much the same 6.7-inch phone, good high refresh rate screen, in-display fingerprint sensor, which I find works well, but I do know people have some points of difference with. It's not your only choice, though, when it comes to biometric authentication, because Google reckons that the camera sensor, plus machine learning, plus the inherent processor and security chip, means that this can now do face unlocking with security. Now that deserves a little bit of explanation, even though I don't have the tools to inherently test that. I'd need like clones of myself and doppelgangers and control samples, and it gets very, very complex. But lots of Android phones will do a simple face unlock, but that's just a flat image. It's not very secure. It's convenient but not secure, which is why you typically can't do payment authentication with these. This, Google reckons, passes that by actually getting enough detail out of your face to authenticate you at a biometric level, which would allow for secure payments. Now, Google's been down this road before. The Pixel 4 had its whole solid processor thing, which actually took a 3D map of your face. It's not doing that, but it does unlock. And certainly the unlocking that way is fast and fluid. It works quite well for me, or at least it has during my test period. In terms of colours, alongside obsidian and porcelain, there is, of course, bay, which is this very, very nice blue colour. Now, I like blue phones. Your taste can vary. I think this is a nice kind of show-off, look-at-me kind of colour. It's got a good finish. It feels and looks premium. I think Google's done a good thing here. Maybe if I wanted to be really picky, I could say, well, 3 colours is not a lot in a range and you perhaps could have done more, but I'm broadly very, very pleased with the design. Obviously, you've got to be willing to put up with a bigger phone, and maybe you don't want to do that. Let me know in the comments if you'd prefer the smaller Pixel 8, which I will get around to reviewing, but I've focused very heavily in on the Pixel 8 Pro at first. Let's talk about the camera. Now, in straight hardware terms, Pixel 8 Pro packs a primary 50 megapixel lens, secondary 48 megapixel ultra-wide, and tertiary 48 megapixel 5x telephoto zoom, while at the front is a 10.5 megapixel selfie camera. And look, numerically, that's fine. Maybe not that exciting, because really you can get 50 megapixel sensors on surprisingly cheap phones these days. But then smartphone photography is about an awful lot more than just the raw megapixel numbers. It's what you do with them, really. So let's start at the front with that selfie camera. New this year is autofocus, and this works really well. I got really nice sharp selfies of myself with it. Now, they can't do anything about me looking like me, but it works well. It's quick, it's accurate. The depth of field effect is quite good as well. Well done, nice job. On the zoom front, the Pixel 8 Pro supports up to 5x optical zoom, and it'll punch that out further to 30x digital zoom, what Google calls super res zoom. It's their term for it, in much the same way that Samsung talks about space zoom, for example. The reality there is I've often found these really, really long zooms to be terribly unsatisfying because you just lose so much detail. And honestly, a lot of the time you'd be better off taking the standard shot and post-editing it in something to try and crop in a little bit better. But again, I had to put this to the test. So I headed to a local park to take some photos. So first of all, here's just the wide view. Gives a slightly distorted view of the size of the park, but that's natural enough with an ultra-wide lens like this. Then we switch up to the standard wide view, all still quite a good shot. And then to the 5x zoom. Again, while my framing is not perfect here, the shot itself is perfectly good. So what if we punch it up to 30 times? Well, there we have it. That's actually pretty good for what it is. Not perfect for sure. And obviously you could get maybe even a little bit better if you're using a tripod. These are all handheld shots. But it's quite good. It's quite satisfying. I actually think it works a little bit better than Samsung's implementation at the same kind of length. That ultra-wide lens isn't just about taking ultra-wide shots, however, because it also does double duty as a macro lens. And because it can do autofocusing as well, that means you can get really quick macro focus effects. And that works really, really well. Here's a quick shot of a bee that I took, and if I crop in even closer, the detail really is very, very good for what was literally a whip it out of my pocket, take a quick snap kind of shot. This is not super framed in any way, and obviously the bee is alive and moving, and it still managed to capture it really well. I was very, very impressed with that. Any premium phone has to be able to handle low light well, and historically, Pixel has done this rather well, largely down to Google's computational photography, although in recent years, including with Pixel 8, they've started to look more at what the hardware can do to bring out better low light quality. So to put this to the test, I grabbed the Pixel 8 Pro and an iPhone 15 Pro, and I took them to a local park late one night to take some photos. This is a test I've run a bunch of times across a bunch of different phones, so I'm quite familiar with what can be done and can't be done. I put them head to head. I would have liked to do the iPhone 15 Pro Max, I just didn't have an iPhone 15 Pro Max. So here's the shot out of the iPhone 15 Pro for a quick field shot, and then the same thing for the Google. I'm going to give it to the iPhone here a little bit. It's just a little bit brighter. It's captured a little bit more light. And that's really what I'm looking for here, not necessarily specific image quality or beauty or anything like that. I will say that the iPhone has managed to maybe start to oversaturate the colors, which is something that the older Pixels used to do in the way that they used to punch up the brightness of a shot. You'd end up with a slightly kind of crayon-y effect. And while that hasn't exactly happened here, it's bordering on it. The grass is maybe a little bit more naturalistic in the Google shot, but I would give it to the iPhone by a margin. That being said, the Pixel is competing for now. However, switching to some nearby trees which had a great deal less light on them, the iPhone really does take this one. It just gets more detail down towards the base of the trees that the Pixel just does not pick up on at all. And my final shot really made this very, very clear to me, because just near there, there's a BMX track, and I couldn't see the BMX track. I knew it was there, but it was that dark at this point that the naked eye could not make out the little hills of that track. I could simply look towards it and go, yep, I know it's over there. Here's what the iPhone 15 Pro saw. And you can see the hill there. It's not great. This is not a great photo. I'm not pretending it is. But you can see what's there, even though my own eyes could not see that. And then here's the night shot taken with the Pixel 8 Pro. And yeah, that's not a comparison that favors the Pixel 8 Pro. So what's the takeaway value for low light photography? Look, the Pixel 8 Pro is decent. I think the reality is that first field shot's probably more representative of the kinds of low light shots that people are going to want to take. I'm very deliberately torture testing these phones. But if you want the best in low light, it's not here. Would have been handy to compare against the S23 Ultra before anyone throws that into the comments. But again, I just didn't have access to one. I can't test what I don't have. The Pixel 8 Pro will also get a video boosting feature, inventively called Video Boost, designed to improve video clarity and stabilization through AI, but I can't actually test that at launch because it's a software feature and it's not live on day one. Instead, it's going to come down the pipeline in a couple of months. But one feature relevant to the cameras I could test was Audio Magic Eraser. It's the sonic counterpart to the Magic Eraser feature that's been on the last couple of Pixel phones. Audio Magic Eraser focuses on voice in video, stripping out unwanted ambient sounds if you edit through the Pixel 8 Pro itself. While its video mode does have a speech enhancement feature, Audio Magic Eraser is a post-processing step. And in my tests, well, look, I'll show you. I took some video just while I was out walking. The first clip you'll see is just me, no audio enhancement, all the natural sound around me. The second clip is having run Audio Magic Eraser. So what about Audio Eraser? Well, in theory, it should be able to cut out a whole bunch of ambient sound, which is what I'm really going to test here. I have no control over the sound while I'm out and about walking, but let's see how much of it I can cut out from this video in post-processing, or in this case, in Audio Eraser processing anyway. Quite a bit of vehicle noise, some wind, all sorts of things going on here. But how much of it can you hear, and how much can you hear of my voice? So what about Audio Eraser? Well, in theory, it should be able to cut out a whole bunch of ambient sound, which is what I'm really going to test here. I have no control over the sound while I'm out and about walking, but let's see how much of it I can cut out from this video in post-processing, or in this case, in audio eraser processing anyway. Quite a bit of vehicle noise, some wind, all sorts of things going on here, but how much of it can you hear and how much can you hear of my voice? The magic doesn't stop there either, with a new magic editor for photos that allows for AI-led image manipulation, so you can shift individual elements within a photo around. Google's quite clear, to be fair, that this is early software and it may make mistakes. You have to agree to that before you even start using it. And look, it's not wrong about the mistakes. So, as an example, here's a photo of a cockatoo just having a munch on some grass, as it is wont to do, and I thought this might not be a bad image to play around with. It's fairly complex, there's a few things going on. Let's see if I can just move the cockatoo up in the image a bit. Here's what Magic Editor did to that cockatoo. So, the movement, not a big problem, but for one problem. It's stolen its beak. It did not recognize the beak as part of the bird. This poor bird is going to starve to death. Okay, all right. AI got it wrong there. That's all that really is. But it's a good point to make that these kinds of AI-led features, they're still in their infancy. They're still learning. Hopefully they will get better. Hopefully that bird would end up with a beak someday. At launch, though, it's a nice-to-have feature that may or may not work well for you. Obviously, it is going to depend on the composition of your shot and what you're actually trying to do with it. And look, overall, the Pixel 8 Pro is a largely pleasing camera phone. It's not quite the best for low-light photography, but it's certainly in the conversation, and the rest of its feature set and the way that Google intelligently incorporates AI features do give it a lot of appeal. So underneath the glass, the Google Pixel 8 runs on Google's own Tensor 3 processor. This is obviously the successor to the Tensor 2. It packs in 9 CPU cores and a Mali G715 GPU. And typically in a smartphone review, this is where I'd break out a few benchmarks and comparisons. While they're not the final word on smartphone performance, they can give a good comparative picture, not only for how a smartphone performs relative to its competition, but also to prior generations. However, and this always happens with Pixel phones, and only Pixel phones, I can't. Or at least, I can't at the time of writing. My standard benchmarks that I use are noted as not compatible with the Pixel 8 Pro before launch. They're the only Android phones that do this, and this always happens with Pixel phones. About a month after they launch, they suddenly become available. For what it's worth, there are Geekbench 6 benchmarks that suggest scores, but I can't really quantify how that phone was used. I'd much rather do that testing myself, and even things like sideloading do not seem to make those benchmarks start working. Cynically speaking, I might argue that Google is perhaps playing games here because it's pretty much the only application set that does not work on this phone. Everything else has installed, and anecdotally, look, yeah, this is a nice, fast, slick phone. I should also very briefly talk about the fact that it has 7 years of OS upgrades, which is unprecedented. I've seen a lot of discussion of, oh, well, this is just fake promise because they can't possibly offer 7 years. No one's going to have the phone after 7 years, or the battery's going to be dead after 7 years. Well, yeah, look, battery chemistry does degrade over time, that's true. But these are repairable phones. You could always just opt for a battery replacement or upgrade down the track. And 7 years, I think, is just a really beautiful vote of confidence in the hardware and the idea that we should all run our phones a bit longer. I think that's a really good thing. The other weird hardware feature that Google threw onto the Pixel 8 Pro is a thermometer. Yeah, a thermometer. Contactless thermometer. It's on the back with the camera modules. And the idea here is that you hold it about 5 centimeters or so from an object you want to measure the temperature of, and it'll tell you the temperature of that object. Which sounds interesting because you're probably thinking, well, hey, cool, I can use it on the kids to see if they really need to stay home from school, but no. Or at least, strictly speaking, no. So Google does not actually have this thing qualified here in Australia by the TGA, in the US by the FDA, as a human-grade thermometer. That is a medical-grade thermometer, I suppose I should say. It will measure you if you hold it in the right way, but that Google is not saying, yeah, look, this is actually fully accurate. And I don't know. I struggle with this a bit. It feels like a feature that Google's thrown in because they felt like it'd be an interesting point of differentiation, and I suppose that it is, and maybe if you're a chef and you want to be able to quickly kind of go, oh, roughly what temperature is this thing, then perhaps that's okay, but I just feel like this is one of those features that an awful lot of Pixel 8 Pro buyers will go, hey, cool, look, my phone can do this thing, and you'll do that for maybe a couple of days after you first get it, and you'll probably just forget that it's there. So should you buy the Pixel 8 Pro? Well, look, if you're in the market for a premium Android phone, I actually think this is one of the best options open to you on balance. It's powerful. The battery life is really good. The cameras are generally very good. Maybe not the absolute best in low light performance, but I think they make up for it elsewhere in terms of their generalized performance in a way that's going to be pleasing to most users. They're very price competitive. While they are a little more expensive than prior Pixel generations, they're still considerably more affordable than, for example, the competing iPhone or Samsung options in the same sizes. And that 7-year upgrade means that this is a phone that you could invest in now and still be using theoretically through to the end of the decade, which frankly is just kind of mind-blowing. Anyway, that's my take on the Google Pixel 8 Pro. What do you want to know? Got any comments to make? Leave them below. Thanks for watching all the way to the end, and as always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe.